Hey, everybody. Welcome to Bits and Bips, where we explore how crypto and macro collide one basis point at a time. As always, I'm your host, Austin Campbell, high scholar of Zero Knowledge Consulting, here with my co-hosts, Ram Ahluwalia, Maester of Wealth, leader of Lumina, and Chris Perkins, the Golden Hand of Coin Fund. We're here to discuss the latest stories in the worlds of crypto and macro, and boy, do we have a few stories today. But before we start, remember that nothing we say here is investment advice. Please check unchainedcrypto.com/bits and bips for more disclosures. And before we begin, a quick commercial break.
Introducing Nexo, the premier digital wealth platform. Receive interest on your digital assets. Borrow against them without selling. Trade a variety of cryptocurrencies, all in one platform. Now available in the US. Get started today at nexo.com/unchained. Quick note before we get into today's episode. Bits and Bips now has its dedicated feed. We're spinning off from the Unchained feed and moving to a new podcast and YouTube channel. So if you want to keep up with our weekly live streams and macro meets, crypto breakdowns, make sure to subscribe to Bits and Bips directly. We won't publish there until March, but subscribe today so you can be ready for launch. Be sure to subscribe to the new feeds at unchainedcrypto.com/bits and bips.
All right. Welcome back. And I guess right at the top, we've got to start with the biggest thing in the market right now, which is Iran. So over the weekend, there were U.S. strikes on Iran. Whoop. All right, there we go. In an operation dubbed Epic Fury, the United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran. Early reports indicated widespread airstrikes on strategic targets across Tehran and the country. Perhaps the biggest news is that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who had ruled Iran since '89, was confirmed killed in the strikes now by both Iranian state media and originally Israel. One could say that is the most significant escalation in U.S.-Iran tensions in decades. The fallout of that led to immediate regional escalation. Iran has retaliated with missile strikes on U.S. bases, allied facilities, and commercial targets across the Gulf region. Multiple Arab countries have now been struck by Iran, multiple impacts, for instance, in the UAE. Casualties and damages have been reported on both sides, really. The Iranian mourning and declared 40-day period of national bereavement for Khamenei headlining that. So in terms of market impact, before we get to some of the items that have happened inside of this, oil prices originally surged as traders are pricing heightened geopolitical risk and potential disruptions to Middle East supply routes. Bitcoin and risk assets down slightly at the start, but rebounded quickly, tapped 70,000 today. Gold reached 5,400 an ounce again today. And Polymarket attracted record trading volumes as U.S.-Iran bets topped 529 million at risk. And in terms of actual reporting, hyperliquid oil prices were used by Bloomberg over the weekend in terms of keeping track of what was going on with the situation. So I want to start, Ram, from the economic perspective with your view of war is typically seen as both a risk event and a supply chain disruption event. What are you seeing in terms of market impact here as a result of what's happening over the weekend?
Yeah, no, so great introduction. So, as you pointed out, oil prices are up. And so industries that rely on oil are down. Consumer discretionary, for example, airlines, travel and leisure are down. And then energy, leading sector in the market. So all sorts of sub-industry groups within energy, also like oil field services, have done really well. We talked, I think last Monday, we said the likelihood of Iran may be inversely proportional to Trump's polling in the wake of Epstein. And here we are 1 week later. I'm not saying there's cause and effect, but there's a consideration. At the very least, there's a consideration, like a little tiebreaker, perhaps. At the same time, this Iran news has been discussed for so long that it's been telegraphed into markets. And you saw that with the 10-year coming down to 4% from 4.25%. You saw that with energy leading QQQ. XLE energy ETF is a top performer year to date. So people did position around it, and the VIX index was in the low 20s for most of last week and is there now. I find it remarkable that essentially markets are flat and the volatility index is actually up. That's actually bullish. It's actually a good sign. So that's constructive. But I don't think there's really much of a long-term impact. The amount of kinetic energy, I'm sure Chris will go into this, is just massive. There's no credible counter threat that the IRGC has. I want to be careful and use the word IRGC, not Iran, because the IRGC is not representative of the Iranian people, far from it. And the 3 casualties were friendly fire. So, Pete Hegseth this morning and Trump over the weekend suggested there might be like a 4-week and perhaps 5-week time frame. I think they managed expectations pretty well and low, and that helped the market. The market didn't have that. As soon as Pete Hegseth came out this morning and offered that guidance, the market started to rally. He also just injected a lot of confidence in his remarks. I mean, you listen to it, and it's like listening to an earnings report from Palantir or something. You just see it like American dominance like coming through the screen there, right? And I think expectations will be beat. I think that 4 to 5 weeks is actually too low. I think it'll come. I think resolution. You can debate what resolution is defined as, but in terms of the ending of kinetics will happen much faster than people think. Chris, what's your take?
Yeah. So first up, I'll say that war has come to crypto's doorstep. I mean, how many times have we been in Dubai, guys, or Abu Dhabi, one of the global centers of crypto? And, here we are seeing bombs drop. Again, through an idealistic lens, this is why we're here. Crypto is very resilient. It's decentralized, and you can't just take off, it's not like cutting off the head of the snake from a crypto perspective. We're decentralized. We've got validators. So in case one center gets hit, the networks will perpetuate. Now, let's talk about the war a little bit. To your point, this has been telegraphed, not for a week or 2 weeks, but for 47 years, right? Like this had to come to a head at one point. I think there were some surprises we can get into, but the strategic importance of this is pretty material. The Strait of Hormuz controls 20% of the world's oil. 80% or so, I think, goes to Asia. China is very dependent on oil. They were dependent on Venezuelan oil. They're dependent on Iranian oil. And now the U.S. is positioned to have perhaps control over both of those streams. So this is also part of a greater, I think, China containment strategy. And what surprised me about this was the Iranian response. Yes, they did target U.S. bases, but they also went after every single Arab country that, previously said, what, maybe we don't want you guys to use our airspace, guys. Now they're like, okay, we've had enough. And there was a lot of historic resentment, between the Saudis and the Iranians, as an example. So I think, if anything, that will probably bring this to an end. And the question is, what is the end? And what does this mean for markets? So when I was in Iraq a long time ago, we were there to encourage democracy. Our mission was, hey, we're going to turn this into a democratic, friend, just like us. And I think that was part of the policy for failure, because we tried to force our ideals on a country that maybe had different ideals at the time. I think what we're seeing with Trump, and if you're going to see anything that comes out of how does legacy look at the Trump foreign policy, it's about certain cases looks like take the head off the snake. And I think what he's going to prioritize is stability over ideals, right? So at some point, somebody's going to pop up and say, I'm the strong man, probably, and Venezuela was the woman. He didn't go with the Democratic, opposition. He went with the regime because he wanted stability. I think he's going to look for somebody to assert strength and power and stability. And I think that's how the war probably comes to an end, is that I don't see us moving boots on the ground, which would be bloody, protracted, and be very bad, I think, long-term for the economy. But then pivoting to crypto prices, I think Bitcoin showed a lot of strength, as did crypto. I think we were already part of that bottoming. I know I get accused of being the bull on this program, but I think we were bottoming, and now we see liquidity, all roads are leading to liquidity coming into the markets. And the fact that, risk assets, Bitcoin hit what came down, it showed a ton of resiliency. It feels like a very good setup for me. And, last thing I'll say is, I've got friends out there who are on the watch, who are like my classmates are now the commodores of the fleets out there. All of my thoughts and prayers to the people who are, in the UAE and the surrounding countries, our friends, service members deployed and their families. I know how it is. It's not easy. So thinking about you guys always.
So picking up on a couple of threads there, Chris, one that I think has been, what's the right way to say this, maybe misunderstood in the United States is the position of Iran versus the rest of the Gulf, right? There's this tendency when you're not like an expert to regard things as sort of a monolith, right? Like see the whole argument around clarity where people are like, oh, the banks, and let me assure you all the banks don't agree. It's a similar problem here. And one of the things that really did surprise me as well, and I actually think is driving part of the market reaction, is it's like Iran went out of their way to alienate all of their potential sympathetic countries around them as quickly as humanly possible by firing missiles and drones at all of them, right? Like if you're in like Qatar and you're suddenly catching missiles from the Iranians, you're like, what the hell is this? Like, what did we do to you? The UAE obviously has not had a great diplomatic relationship with them, but it's a very different thing to have missiles fired at literally your hotels, right? Like, let us not make any pretense that these were military targets here. I believe in Saudi Arabia, there was an attempt to disrupt oil refining as well. So like these are significant sort of economic attacks, and it's branching out far beyond just US military bases in Israel, which were the typical sort of shots in previous, altercations. Two, being very realistic here and looking at like capabilities across the map, there hasn't been too much of an effective response, right? Like the United States lost three fighter jets to friendly fire and currently 0 to Iran. Israel, like obviously has sported a similarly positive record here. One of the things that I'm also watching is the market reacting to the fact that it may be that Iran was mostly talk from a military capacity standpoint versus like operational capacity to really hit back at scale. Like we have not seen hypersonic missiles into US carrier groups or anything of that sort that people were worried about. We have not seen mass casualties among civilians in other places. We haven't seen major disruptions to infrastructure yet. So as part of what the market is pricing, just call it the kinetic superiority of the Americans so far.
Two quick reactions. First off, the head is gone, right? So the leaders assembled Saturday morning, all 40 of them in a compound, an incredible act of cell phone stupidity. And they're gone. Now, of course, they did that because they probably believe their electronic communications are compromised, which they are. So they had to meet in person. So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't there. The other thing I read is that they delegated decision-making to the to on-the-ground troops. So that's why I believe you're seeing them strike their neighbors. I don't think it's top-down. I think they've lost that because it makes no sense what they're doing. It shows you just how ineffectual and incompetent autocratic leadership is. They have only 2 levers: fire a missile or issue a menacing threat. Those are the only things they know how to do. They have no other kind of maneuverability. The interesting thing going forward is that U.S. allies will now control the Strait of Hormuz, which is a nerve point, to Chris's point, for China. So the long-term strategic benefits for the United States go up quite a bit. It's a very interesting juncture in history here. One last point, and I'd love to get your take on this. Which Mossad agent is going to run around at this point? I mean, the IRGC hired a guy to smoke out Mossad because they're so heavily infiltrated. Turns out that guy worked for Mossad, and if you don't work for Mossad, you're going to get bombed, right? So it's almost like, okay, which institution steps up? Which are you with Mossad? No, okay, you're going to get bombed. Isn't that how this plays out?
I mean, arguably the best possible outcome for peace is that the new Ayatollah is also a Mossad agent, right?
I mean, it's going to be a complete rewiring of the Middle East in many senses, and there are some age-old rivalries in that region between Shia and Sunni that go well back over 1,000 years, right? And I think it's an incredible as the geopolitical starts, I guess, reshifting. I think the economies are also simultaneously shifting. What are the Middle East governments looking to do? They're looking to get into data centers, right? And data centers, why is UAE positioning itself as the head of crypto? There's a lot of interest in emerging technologies. I think as things settle, it's going to be very bullish for crypto. It's going to be bullish for AI and tech. The Saudis as well, the MBS, like him or not, he's very focused on a pro-tech agenda. And, as things settle and they have to invest less in kinetic warfare, I think that they're going to be pouring more and more into tech. I hope that's the case. I really hope we get out of the violence game and back into, tech innovation investment. And I think that's where we're heading if we can get this right. The hard part is what's next. Nobody knows, right? And I hate it when they're like interviewing military people. Well, what have you planned next? Like, it's almost impossible to do. But, to your point, Ram, they have incredible intelligence. We saw that with the complete dismantling of Hezbollah. And we saw it again over the weekend. So, how do they work closely back channel with somebody who can assert stability and control? I'm not sure it's going to be democratic. I would like for it to be, but I think the prioritization, because remember, we're in a real politic age. It's all about real politic. And like it or not, Trump is moving in his interests. If this thing settles as he wants and he's got a strong, stable, non-confrontational Iran, that makes the region better. China is now, they're much more dependent. We're controlling a lot of the oil that they used to get below sanction prices, like below market. So it's a move of strength if you can pull it off. And mind you, like we talked about earlier, it's March Madness, right? We're starting to kick off the midterm season. And so this all plays into the narrative. So he's moved on the chessboard. Interesting to see what comes next.
So Trump incited the population to take over the government. So that's a call for popular-led leadership, right? So that's a possibility. Absent that, the clerics would have to get together and nominate a new leader. So those are the two paths. We'll have to see how it plays out. I hope a popular-led approach would work. I think the difference, back to your point on Iraq, I don't think it was so much about ideals. I think it was more around a lack of institutions. That's it. Lack of habits and routines around how democracy is conducted. It's a lot more than just an election. You have to have parties and primaries and discussion and a debate and free press in the fifth column. Iran has a better shot, I believe, at that because you had protests from a very thoughtful, highly educated population. It was coming from the ground up. So
it's a great
one
point.
can be hopeful.
Yeah. So democracy in its best form is bottoms up, not tops down. And to your point, what makes our democracy so robust in this country is state and local government. Even down to city councils. Like, it's just very well organized and democratic. That was not my experience in Iraq. And my experience in Iraq was, hey, we're here. The guy in Baghdad, he's your new elected leader. Deal with it. And the sheikh's like, no, man, I've been in charge for 1,000 years. That's not how it works around here. And so it's just much more complex. I guess my point is that I think the administration wants stability first and foremost. They want control of the oil. And I earnestly hope that a grounds up democratic regime emerges. The Iranian people are very smart, very thoughtful, very educated, and I think they want it. I hope they get there.
There was a guy on Twitter, his handle is Roman Helmet Guy, who was joking a little while back that actually we should just rename it Persia, right, as part of this. But Chris, to go to what you were saying, is there is actually a long, right, and deep history in this region that I think the Iran name in the recent regime kind of obscures. Like, Persia does have a very long history of like education and contribution to both the world and the region, that sort of the best case is that that is rediscovered in some way and sort of brought back in that part to the world. And then, by the way, they're sitting on a ton of oil. So as much as we're seeing like an oil supply, like disruption move of prices upwards right now, if you end up with a stable, like call it globally aware cooperative government, and I don't mean cooperative in like bowing down to any one group. I just mean in the sense of like not constantly attacking and antagonizing your neighbors. You could actually very quickly have a much stronger Iranian economy, right? And it becoming the gateway between Europe and Asia once more. So to me, there is a very positive case. But I'll also remind everybody, we had Omid on here last week talking about how sort of the opposition in Iran is quite weak, right? There is not really an organized sort of, group pushing back.
Well, it was slaughtered, 30,000 of them.
Charge. Correct. Yeah. Partially because of that, partially because many already left the country, if we're being totally honest. And then I think the other problem you have, and Chris, you're familiar with this from Iraq, is there are factions in this country who would probably rather be their own country, right? Like, what are you doing with the Kurds, for instance? I think the potential pathways, one that maybe is under discussed, is neither the current regime staying in charge, nor like Iran just flips back, but rather call it Yugoslavia, which is to say, does this thing break apart into several factions that eventually become their own countries?
Yeah, I mean, the people will need to be involved, right? The suppression of the people was driven in part by the IRGC, but also local law enforcement. I don't know that the U.S. government is going to take out local law enforcement. I don't know how you do that. So that has to be done by the people. I think you can be cautiously optimistic, though. It's hard to see what the left tail risk is, though. It's hard to see what the left tail risk is from this. The left tail risk is the conflict lasts longer than expected. There are fewer transports through the Strait of Hormuz, mainly because those ships don't have the right insurances.
Yep.
But that's temporary phenomena. We had this in 2022 with COVID and delays in shipping. This is a temporary phenomena. So markets should look past this.
I think they have. I mean, look at the resiliency of crypto, right?
I don't think just crypto. Equities have been pretty resilient today as well. Like as you look down the list, I think this, to me, right, like having seen market regimes before, this is being priced right now as though it is a regional conflict, is the way I would describe it. That is to say, we don't see major global spillover. Honestly, like Russia and Ukraine was more disruptive to markets than this was.
Yeah. And again, what has it shown? Venezuela happened on a Friday night. Hyperliquid was price discovery. This happened on Saturday night. Everyone looked at Hyperliquid. Now Bloomberg's even quoting it. What we're wondering is like, okay, so Hyperliquid has an edge now. It seems to be the 24/7 global commodities indicator. Like we kind of knew how oil was going to trade as soon as it happened and into the week. We didn't have to wait for Sunday night or whatever for markets to wake up. But we're also seeing the big exchanges now moving towards 24/7. So the question is can Hyperliquid keep that edge? Because like, we've been around long enough. Like liquidity is very, very hard to achieve. They got it. And once you got it, it's very hard to get rid of it or lose it. And so as the big guys come in, what does that going to mean for liquidity once their mode of 24/7 is reduced? So like that's what we've been looking at. But again, another gold stamp for the crypto markets. They work 24/7 and they gave the markets what they need on the weekends.
One of the fascinating parts of this too is that a counter argument against 24/7 trading, and Chris, I'm sure you've heard this as well, is that it will be risk increasing because we'll get all these jumpy moves when people are not awake, et cetera, et cetera. And actually in this event, it appears maybe to have been somewhat risk reducing, potentially, because instead of just uncertainty, like nobody knows what the price is going to open at, we've got these proxy indicators sort of showing us in a market of people, like even if it's not the full market, like let us accept that Hyperliquid is a small subset of markets currently, it is at least not a completely uninformed and idiotic subset. So you can look at that and say there's some information value in here. And it gives us sort of a boundary on what the open is going to be. I know you and I were at an event earlier today, and we'll get to that, but I think one of the things that this is revealing is that the 24/7 news cycle might speed up the information discovery, but that may be risk decreasing in many cases as opposed to risk increasing, because you don't have the giant jump risk that people are trying to manage over weekends anymore.
Yeah, which should lower your collateral everywhere, right? Because you're collateralizing in real time. That should result in additional liquidity coming back into the system as people, because you used to have to hold the collateral from like Friday till Tuesday if it's a 3-day weekend, and there's a stress, God forbid. That's one of the beauties of 24/7 markets. You get to lower that collateral and increases liquidity. The other data point that we had, frankly, was prediction markets, which had their own little challenges over the weekend, and debates. I think there's plenty to talk about there as well.
I mean, I'm going to say right now, the main thing I'm coming around to on prediction markets is that they're learning in a way that crypto has been learning some of the lessons of financial markets. Prediction markets are in the process of learning many of the lessons of insurance markets right now, which is to say, if you're familiar with insurance and reinsurance, some of the biggest fist fights in the history of those markets are around, do I owe you money or not? And that's always the edge cases on terms and conditions and like how were events defined. Maybe the classic one is, does hurricane insurance cover flooding? Right. And like a giant debate that has like ripped through the Florida court system and was worth tens of billions of dollars. And these sorts of things I'm watching in prediction markets now, where the number one thing I would advise everybody is, if you're looking at prediction markets, pay special attention to the wording of the terms of each of these markets. Like, that is going to be a space that will need to be standardized over time with much better, call it neutral arbitration, in the same way that insurance and reinsurance markets work right now, because you can't have a market where most people thought it would resolve to yes and it resolves to no, or vice versa, become the standard, because then people just back away and stop using it.
Yeah, I think this Iran event has refocused market attention. However, there are still larger issues that are out there and brewing under the surface, right? Like QQQ is down 7% year to date. NVIDIA reported blockbuster earnings and it sold off. Markets were strong today, but it was driven by energy. Most sectors were down, including consumer discretionary. Staples rallied year to date, but you've got now stocks like Walmart at 45 times earnings and Costco. That's not sustainable. That's going to have to give back. And so where's the leadership going to come from? I was just looking at Amazon's free cash flow yield. It's 0.3%. 0.3%. It's incredibly low. That number should be 2 to 3%. You've got the Department of Defense having a public dispute with Anthropic, now awarding a contract to OpenAI. So there are these issues under the surface. Right? Valuations are elevated versus free cash flow. The positioning is still crowded. And we're seeing technical weakness in the leading themes in the market. I see people buying the dip on like everything, even things that are just down 40%. It's like, really? It's a bear market and you're just buying the dip. So I do think that after we get through maybe a bit of a rally here through some of the VIX decay and a faster resolution than people think around Iran, there are still larger issues that the market's trying to address. And obviously midterm elections are there too.
I mean, I was going to say, let's go down one of the rabbit holes that you brought up there, which is the AI component, because this is something we've been talking about for a while. So currently, there was a little bit of a brouhaha between Anthropic and the Pentagon, where Anthropic's CEO, and Anthropic, for those listening, kind of positioned itself as the safety AI. Claude had guardrails against certain military and surveillance uses, and tensions escalated pretty quickly with the Department of War, as they both sought broader contractual language allowing use of Anthropic's models, but also were alleging that some of the things that Anthropic had, call it implicitly or explicitly permitted before, they were backing away on. I think to be honest, like both sides are telling the story most favorable to themselves, but the core of the debate is who gets to use this thing and for what and on what terms. This escalated pretty quickly. Donald Trump criticized them on social media. Anthropic has done a bunch of PR around this. It framed them as hostile and unreliable for national security needs. And unsurprisingly, somebody else in the market, as happens in competitive marketplaces, stepped in and took advantage. So Sam Altman shows up and signs a contract with the Department of War where it's now OpenAI that will be essentially filling that gap and working with them. There are, again, guardrails around that, but not the same sort of categorical refusals. So to me, before we get to the operational realities for the military, Ram, I want to come back to a point that you have raised previously on this show, which is where is the value capture going to be in AI? Because to me, this is maybe the best example of somebody just hot swapping one model for another and moving on with their life. So like, what is the difference?
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, I instructed our team at Lumina to switch over to Anthropic and their enterprise use cases. They work really well. I give credit to Dario for a principled stand. I don't think he would do that. I still don't think, deep down inside, I think they will bend the knee eventually out of economic necessity. And I'm concerned that Sam Altman now is playing some role. Is it critical or not? I hope not. With U.S. Department of Defense. This is a guy that was fired by his board, where a developer died or was killed on his watch, and where he made misrepresentations to early investors like Elon Musk. Where's the integrity in any of that? It's not a one-off; it's a three-off. That's a pattern. So it's a bit of a concern that OpenAI is in there. Couldn't we have found someone else, please? Right? But yeah, no, I agree. There's limited value capture in all this. You know, the open source models like Hugging Face, you know, they're a tenth of the cost of these models. They're 1 year behind, but they catch up. So it's just like the cost of storage, right? We saw this with the hard drives and the memory, right? It just drops over time. That's going to happen. So I don't see the value capture. Look at like Palantir stock. Look, I think that's a bubble deflating, but hey, they've got value capture. It got the multiple. I don't see it for these LLMs, which are in a brutal war of attrition with each other.
Let me just chime in. I mean, as somebody who's been in war, been shot at, lost a lot of friends, this debate is really hard for me because obviously, you know, you want to do the great thing about the U.S. military is you always want to do the right thing on the battlefield. You don't swear allegiance to the president or to a king. You swear it to the Constitution. As an officer, you have to follow the lawful orders and uphold the Constitution. And that's wonderful. This is actually very similar to crypto, this debate that's going on. Now, what Dario said is there's two conditions he had. One was like lethal autonomous decision-making, and the second one was mass surveillance. What I've come to know, whether it's crypto or AI, is that it's not the technology that is evil or not evil. Maybe it is in the case of AI, but generally it's technology. It's the behavior that people employ it to do, right? And the thing is like technology, we have laws. Just because you have new technology doesn't mean that you ignore the old laws. And as you're thinking about mass surveillance, well, if there's laws that prevent mass surveillance, it's a policy issue. And then if the government tries to conduct mass surveillance, like put it to bed, you know, throw people in jail, like hold them accountable because it's illegal. And that's why it's important to have that policy. I think the lethality piece is a little bit more complex for me because if there is a technology that saves like one Marine on the battlefield or one of your, you know, provided it's done legally, why would you suppress its development if it can be done ethically? So like I'm almost of the acceleration camp. Like you can't restrict it. You need to study it because like, let's go back to Iran. The Iranians are really good at drones. They have the Shahed drone, which is at low cost. I mean, they've had effect with it on the battlefield just through sheer size. Like I've come from a place, I'm sorry, but like you got to give the guys and the ladies on the ground the best tools possible. And like, but law should apply. And I think Dario's point is like, well, wait a second. The laws haven't caught up to this technology. Well, we got to hold then our Congress accountable. And, we have to use the democracy that we talked about. So it's tricky. But I just hate anything that deprives, our men and women on the ground who are sacrificing their lives, anything that protects them.
I think another important point there, I understand this is unpleasant to a lot of people, call it in the theoretical ethics camp, but in war, people play to win, right? And what I mean by that is if you're not willing to do something with an AI model and the other side is, and that thing works, then they just win. So one of the things that I think I'll just be transparent and say, we don't know from the outside exactly where the lines were drawn. But if you're in the Department of War and Anthropic is telling you, we want them drawn here and it's going to impede operational capabilities, and OpenAI is telling you, no, over here, and it's not, that's a trivial decision for them to make, right? Because it's back to the whole, God, what was that quote from Unforgiven? Deserve ain't got nothing to do with it, right? Like both sides are playing to win. And ultimately, Chris, to your point, if the United States is handicapping ourselves in a way that's causing us to lose conflicts or get our people killed, then that is a bad decision, just strictly speaking in that regard.
So there's a case we made that Anthropic may have been held captive by its own employees. So the US DoD agreed that the AI technology would only be used for lawful purposes. In fact, there's a post from the Undersecretary of Defense going through the contract language. And from their point of view, it looks completely reasonable. And also, David Sachs and Elon both stated that there are a number of holdovers from the Biden administration that went to Anthropic. And if you look outside Anthropic's HQ, there's a lot of chalk and rainbows and quasi-protests or support, this and that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that decision was made because of talent people. They were trying to find a way not to do a deal that, in fact, would be lawful and address the concerns of Anthropic. After all, that's in the contract. They weren't making the claim that the DoD wouldn't abide by it. That's not what they said.
I mean, so back to what we've been saying about AI too, is the future that we're seeing here going to be employees losing a lot of the pull to do that over time? Because, one, Claude just got swapped out for OpenAI piece. But two, one one of the other big AI related news items was Jack Dorsey cutting nearly half the staff at Square, Block, XYZ, whatever we're calling the thing now. Right. And he was saying essentially we're preparing for an AI future. Now, in fairness, they had probably massively overhired in the pandemic. So I have a feeling there's some element of pointing at AI to justify right sizing the staff in general. But it is also a statement that you can be like, well, of the 10,000 people we have, 4,000 of you piece because of AI. And that will also send a message to remaining employees. Like if you're not sort of on the team, you're going to be much more easily replaceable. Are you guys seeing that same dynamic in employment overall, like just zooming out from the DoD?
Yeah, I think they're in a bubble. I think Silicon Valley AI engineers are in a bubble. They're not in reality. They're getting lavish pay packages. They're getting poached. They're turning down $100 million pay packages, right, from Zuck. Startups go through these cycles where they have the foosball table and the free everything and the retreat. And they are in kind of peak mode of this kind of lavishness, and they're in a bubble. But reality is going to come home to roost. Jack Dorsey ran Twitter with thousands and thousands of employees.
Yep.
And Elon runs it with 35. He's not a lean, mean operator. Now, Jack Dorsey is many wonderful and amazing and brilliant things, by the way. I have an incredible amount of respect for Jack Dorsey and how he conducts his life, not just his entrepreneurial business building skills. But he likes to think, he likes to contemplate. He's like a kind of a philosopher entrepreneur. He's not a great cost-efficient operator. And so you're seeing a lot of these startups justify headcount reductions based on AI. Klarna did the same thing. They cut out work, then they say, oh, we did it with AI. Come on, you're just cutting costs to hit your numbers for the IPO.
A lot of uncertainty, isn't it? But your point, hey, if Jack's doing it, I should do it too. And it's a really good opportunity to optimize. Now, let's not even talk about there's legal things too. Like, hey, you're restructuring. Sometimes when you fire people, you get sued. Well, here, everyone's restructuring because of AI. It kind of lowers your liability in certain cases. So I do think it's going to be a trend that you're going to see that companies will use to optimize. And let's not forget, like, AI should be massively deflationary for this reason.
Yeah. I mean, wait till thinking machines blows up. Remember that one? That was the CTO from OpenAI raised a couple $2 billion. Ilya created like safe AI. This is like insanity. This is insane stuff. You're not supposed to get $1 billion valuations on not even a PowerPoint, just because you were around the OpenAI hoop. We're going to look back at this and say, what craziness was done in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting to me, Ram, that you were saying there is exactly the Silicon Valley component of this. Because if you look across like some of, call it the more people-focused or hands-on industries, we're not seeing this same trend everywhere. A good example is my wife works for Memorial Sloan Kettering, the cancer hospital. We are not seeing tons of doctors and nurses being replaced by AI in this context, right? Is it going to be integrated? Is it going to improve productivity? Is AI going to be a powerful diagnostic tool for patients? 100% over time. Mm-hmm. Is it going to lead to massive headcount reductions in the healthcare industry? Almost certainly no, right? And it is kind of funny that there are these subsets of industries that I think are both living in a bubble, but then also disproportionately driving the discourse. Like the idea, you saw that Citrini paper that we were talking about of like, oh, everything's been destroyed by AI. I'm like, that is a very software developer centric.
Yeah, software rallied since then. That marked the bottom, potentially. But like, look at private equity and private credit. It's getting absolutely destroyed in the markets right now, and they're lending to software. They're subject to mark to market. They live in reality land, right? OpenAI and these AI, LLM, this is storytelling. That's why Dario's on the podcast. No one knew who Dario was 6 months ago. Now he's making the podcast circuit because they have to go public. And his thesis for how they get to $1 trillion in revenue. Here's an interesting story in the first 2 years around enterprise adoption, which I believe. I'm actually signed up as a customer. But after year 2, he's like, oh, we'll have a data center full of geniuses. They will solve $950 billion somehow from that. Insanity. No,
I think that trend will play out over time and people will find out. Yeah, I mean, this, okay, so one final point before we go to ads, because then we have one more thing we want to talk about before Chris has to leave. But you've seen this sort of misidentification of where the value is before in other industries. We saw it in the tech bubble. We've also seen it in crypto with fat protocol thesis that right now appears to be slowly falling apart as well. It may be that the AI companies themselves are not the value accretor, right, in this space. That is not a refutation of the value of AI. It is a refutation of the specific conduit of value transmission going through the model companies.
Yeah.
Ram, I believe
our water company is highly valued. We all need water.
Yeah.
Does anyone know the name of their local water company? Is Con Edison $1 trillion company? We all need electricity.
Groceries.
And intelligence will be a utility on demand at low cost, serviced competitively.
Well, on that note, I believe we have a couple more sponsors that we need to hear from, and then Chris and I will talk about something we were at earlier today.
Step into a new era of wealth. Discover Nexo, the premier digital wealth platform. Manage your crypto portfolio with confidence and control. Receive interest on your digital assets. Borrow against them without selling. Trade a wide range of cryptocurrencies, all in one platform. Now available in the US with 30 days of exclusive privileges for new clients. Experience Wealth Club Premier. Access enhanced interest rates, reduced borrowing costs, and crypto cashback on swaps. Get started today at nexo.com/unchained. Quick note before we continue with today's episode. Bits and Bips now has its own dedicated home. We're spinning off from Unchained and launching a standalone podcast and YouTube channel focused on the Fed, macro, AI, and how it all collides with crypto. If you want to keep up with our weekly live streams and macro meets crypto breakdowns, make sure you're following Bits and Bips directly. We won't start publishing until March, but getting set up now means you'll be ready on day one. You can find the new Bits and Bips channels at unchainedcrypto.com/bitsandbips. You can also find us by searching Bits and Bips on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
All right, everybody, welcome back. So earlier today, Chris and I were at the Economic Club of New York with former podcast guest Patrick Witt, talking about the current situation with Clarity and what is going on in Washington, D.C. Chris actually was the one interviewing Patrick on stage. So, Chris, I'm just going to lob this one over to you. What was the conversation about? What was the overall tone? What were your takeaways first?
Yeah, we've been talking about crypto markets for a long time and like what's next for crypto. We know that's an institutional error, and for it to accomplish its true potential, I think a lot of us think that this thing called Clarity has to pass. Right now, the White House, according to Patrick, they've been really focused on obviously getting it over the line. They're implementing Genius right now, because Genius, you just don't pass the bill and go away. There's a lot of different regulations and rulemaking. They're navigating the OCC rulemaking that, again, reaffirmed no interest on stable coins from issuers. So he's navigating all of that. And then, like, when it comes to Clarity, the irony continues to be that what's holding up Clarity? Well, it's the stablecoin stuff that we thought we already litigated. It feels like there's progress. My sense is that Clarity could go either way. The irony is if you look at Polymarket today, there was it shot up recently to about a 70% chance. Pretty thin markets. You're looking at about 300K in the pool, but somebody thinks that this is going to happen, or at least thought a lot more so than the past. It feels like, just what I'm hearing through the grapevine, is that the Coinbases of the world have come a long way. They're at the 45, 50 yard line. The banks really haven't moved and continue to dig in, and that's fine. And like, people are like, well, how come these people get to decide what the bill is? Like, that's for the senators to decide. That's for, and that's exactly what they're trying to do, is because a lot of the senators will sit back and say, I want to hear your story, banks. Tell me. I want to hear your story, Coinbase, crypto. Tell me. And then they figure out which direction that they're going to vote. It's a lot easier for a senator to say, okay, good. Both of you guys figured it out. I'm good now. You're cool. I'm cool. We're all cool. This makes good policy. So it's a lot of people are like, it's not fair. The industry is just, doing it in a bubble. Not so fast, because those senators are thinking about getting reelected as well. So it's just sausage making, and it's hard. And, I personally still think it's going to happen. It's a coin flip. But, the other thing that I think the crypto industry hasn't endeared itself to members of Congress is that there's still a lot of wackos out there, and they need to see more utility, more grown-ups, more focus on, actually delivering real use value to people. That's what we need to do a better job of showing and telling and explaining. So that was my takeaway. What about yours, Austin? You heard it from the audience.
Yeah, so to pile on to a point that you're making there, I think a lot of people in crypto are in denial about how bad the reputation of crypto is after, call it 2022 into present, like with, call it the average two-legged human on the street. I tweeted recently that crypto was ranked probably 1 to 2 slots below slime mold in most people's preference lists, and everybody got mad with me. But I'm like, I'm just repeating what I hear. And I think, Chris, you're right. It makes it easy for people to make bad faith arguments that are anti-crypto and get away with them because the reputation of the industry is so poor. But what I was hearing from the audience too is that one of the things we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years, and this will be unwelcome to some varieties of crypto natives, is a much greater convergence between blockchain technology and traditional financial firms. Right. And that is to say, the idea that we're going to tear down the entire system and replace it with decentralized permissionless money is on the way out. But the idea that we can actually take the current system and massively upgrade it in ways that improve people's lives and financial access and fairness is on the way in. And so one of the things that was interesting to me, because this is very like DC and realpolitik, is a pathway where clarity can happen, and where the sort of like punching match from Genius can be resolved is, how do we make sure that the entities that are, call it the most both politically, socially, and maybe economically favorable get something out of this, AKA are winners, And so one of the big takeaways is I genuinely don't think the interests of the big banks and the community banks are the same here. And people have been treating that side like a monolith for a long time. But the reality is, thought experiment here that I've discussed with a couple of friends before. If all of the stablecoin issuers were to be told, hey, you guys can pay yield, but only if you keep X percentage of your reserve at deposits at banks under, say, $10 billion balance sheet size, who's the loser there except for the giant banks to begin with?
Yeah.
And so I think as we start sort of like making the sausage in Washington, D.C., if you're outside of that framework, you need to understand a couple of things that are important. One, Chris said something really powerful, like now twice in this episode, about how the United States operates, which is we have our Constitution, we have elected representatives, and they do genuinely serve at the behest of the people. You can vote these people out if you don't like them. So number one, if you're listening to this and you're an American citizen and you have a strong view about this, go look up who your House representative and your senators are and just like call them, write them, email them. You can go visit their office in Washington, D.C. Like, it's shocking, but you can check into the building and just go walk right in there. Tell them what you believe. It will move the needle. And that two, finding a compromise between the people in this space who I would say have the biggest political axe here will get things done. And to me, that is call it legitimate people in the crypto industry trying to face US persons. Like Coinbase is a good example. They never fled the US. Whatever you think about them, they've been willing to be regulated. They'll argue about the terms, but they're not fleeing the US. They're not fleeing reporting. And then the community banks, right? Like those are the two groups who people really care about here. The big banks kind of hide behind the community banks as a shield. But the answer is if the community banks are happy and the big banks are not, I like our odds.
I like that too.
Yeah, speaking to Patrick, talked a little bit about quantum. Didn't seem to be keeping him awake at night like our friend Nick Carter. And then getting back to like what people want to see is they want to see better utility and user experience. And to me, I think AI is going to play a huge role in that. Like AI doesn't care about the downstream, wallet interfaces and all the brain damage that we deal with every single day on chain. So I think those are some things. The other thing that's frankly fascinating is that when you talk to normies, in events like that, what was their biggest concern? Security. Isn't this a crappy product because no one can trace it? Actually, everyone can trace it. And we oftentimes forget in our little bubble just how unaware most people are. They just don't care. They've got more important things to care about.
I was going to say one of the things that you run into there is, it's a well-known problem in economics, like the streetlight effect, which is to say, because crypto is so transparent, you can observe the crime and therefore people think it's bad. But there's probably way more crime that we're simply not detecting in the traditional system. And then people think it's better because they don't see it.
Yeah, something I'll share just anecdotally. I still receive reverse inquiry from, call it like baby boomer conservative profile types that are asking about specifically Bitcoin, unprompted. I find that interesting. Like, I do think, and they approach it with curiosity. Like, should I have allocation to Bitcoin with an open mind? So, I do think Bitcoin has crossed the Rubicon in terms of broader public consciousness and understanding, which is a major accomplishment. I have yet to see that with other digital assets thus far. It's not a comment on the price potentials of their assets. I'm just sharing what I see on the ground. I see there's a lot of potential in like what Ethereum has done and other, like Solana, others too, like and Hyperliquid. But the inquiry I do get is around Bitcoin. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and Bitcoin is crypto, right? There's no difference.
I will also hop in there and say the other one that I get, and I see why you're not getting it from the investor side, is stablecoins.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I talk to a lot of companies that are doing things like payroll, international wire business, like how do we just manage our like money? stablecoins are genuinely a topic of conversation from a curiosity standpoint now as well. If we're looking at the two things in crypto that so far to me definitely have product market fit, it's Bitcoin and stablecoins. Everything else I think is very TBD, Rob, as you're saying, which is not a refutation, but just a statement of not yet, right? Maybe it will be in the future, but it's not certain that it will be. I would be shocked if Bitcoin and stablecoins are gone from the playing field like 10, 20, 30
I agree.
years.
I agree. I think there's a lot, bringing it back to Iran, is like, does Bitcoin play a role in whatever institutions of form coming out of this? You know, we talked about social media, access to information and technology, and you know, the Iranians do have these deep technical skills and know-how. One can dream that there might be a role for decentralized money as a check on unchecked executive authority.
They're going to open up Mr. Beast wallets with Tom Lee. I mean, that is not in the realm of impossible.
I would like to point out to everybody, as a topic I just covered in my newsletter, Mr. Beast bought a fintech app that does handle crypto. It's called Step, right? Like, everybody is joking about that, but that may be a very real thing. I will also remind everybody, Mr. Beast has more YouTube subscribers than people who exist in the United States of America. So that is not a small distribution conduit.
I think Iran and crypto hold strong promise. It's a young, educated demographic. I think they're going to come out of this after being suppressed, thinking very forward, being focused on innovation. And I think the conditions are very ripe. I mean, we heard
Trump can make it happen, right?
Yeah.
What is the it though? And
Omi talked about it, how like he was an early adopter largely because of his background in Iran growing up and his ability to seamlessly exchange value with people that he needed to. So I do think the conditions are sound. See what happens, guys.
I would also point out, Chris, we talked about this today at the event too. Like, Patrick was on stage on the topic of security and observability, making the point of it depends what end of that you're on, right? Like, there is the bad of like the North Koreans and what they're doing on chain. But there's also the good of if you've been an extractive system that essentially steals your money either through inflation or just straight up corruption and evil, now you have the ability, and importantly, voluntary ability to opt into the dollar system through stablecoins, right? Like, we're not holding a gun to anybody's head saying you must use Tether, right? Like, that's not how this works. But when you give people options, they are able to take advantage of them, and it fundamentally creates competition that delivers essentially the end value to consumers.
Yes, sir.
All right. So on that note, Chris today has a hard stop, and we have some upcoming programming. So I'm going to go ahead and take us out here, which is thanks for joining us for this episode of Bits and Bips. We'll be back in 1 week to discuss more about how the worlds of crypto and macro are colliding. But next up here, Steve Ehrlich will be with Rob Hadick, general partner of Dragonfly, on the Bips and Bips interview. So until then, that is enough from all of us, everyone, and enjoy the next show.
Cheers.
Have a good one.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bits and Bips, the interview. My name is Steve Ehrlich, head of research at SharpLink, and also your host. And I'm here today with Rob Hadick, general partner at Dragonfly, to discuss everything happening in Iran, its ramifications for crypto and the broader TradFi markets, as well as a few other key topics impacting crypto today. So welcome, Rob.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot to dive into today, but before we start, let's just take a brief moment to hear from some of the sponsors who make the show possible.
Quick note before we get into today's episode. Bits and Bips now has its dedicated feed. We're spinning off from the Unchained feed and moving to a new podcast and YouTube channel. So if you want to keep up with our weekly live streams and macro meets, crypto breakdowns, make sure to subscribe to Bits and Bips directly. We won't publish there until March, but subscribe today so you can be ready for launch. Be sure to subscribe to the new feeds at unchainedcrypto.com/bitsandbips.
Okay, so one quick thing before we begin again. Nothing on the show is financial or investment advice. For full disclosures, please see unchained.com/bitsandbips. And now with Rob, with all that out of the way, let's kind of just dive right into it. Markets today, I mean, it's the usual turmoil when there's some big source of agita in the world, the Israeli and U.S. attacks on Iran. Oil is up, I believe, over $80 a barrel. Gold is up. The dollar's up. Bitcoin is actually kind of holding steady, even though it's not kind of keeping pace with some of the other safe havens. So just kind of lay out for us, what have the last 48 hours been like for you? What are you saying?
Yeah, so it's an interesting time, obviously, for crypto, but in the more macro environment. And this was true before the kind of escalation in Iran. I think actually I've been stopping, or I have not been calling it a war, but I think Pete Hegseth and Trump both called it a war in the last 24 hours as well. And so I think we can start calling it a war in Iran. Over the weekend, we actually saw, I think, crypto hold up pretty well, surprisingly. And despite the fact that, global equity markets were all down overnight, I think I think we opened, the SP opened down maybe a point and a quarter or so. Obviously you mentioned that, oil's up, and it does sort of seem like we're in a situation here where the market is fragile. It's it's really cautious right now, but it's not, kind of falling off a cliff yet. People want to see what's going to happen in the, over the next few weeks. The original story outside of Iran, or at least kind of the first day, was, hey, we've cut off a lot of the leadership, and we expect this to be over quickly. That now seems to be, I think, maybe not true. I think even President Trump yesterday said that he expects this to go at least 4 weeks, which if he's saying at least 4 weeks, there's probably a likelihood that the time frame is actually longer than that, which means that there's a much higher chance of kind of sustained economic risk. Obviously, there was already a conversation around, are we in a stagflationary period, or are we going into one? And it's very clear that, if we have sustained disruption in kind of oil production in the Middle East, and, depending on what happens in the Strait of Hormuz, and on the tanker side, I think that risk of stagflation is even higher, right? And so from a macroeconomics perspective, I think we're in a very precarious time when the markets are, themselves very fragile, as we saw, what happened after the Citrini report. And so I think positive for Bitcoin and crypto, and so much that, they've kind of held up and rallied it a little bit. And it doesn't seem like the crypto markets are as fragile as maybe the equity markets are right now. But, I don't know if the crypto markets will hold up to if we have a real correction in the equity markets.
Yeah. And it's, I think, a really good sort of illustration of that turmoil that you're talking about is what's happening with the rates on the US 10 years, because they're continuing to go down. And it sort of seems a little counter orthodox in a world where the dollar is going up. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, I think what's very clear is that there's the market is concerned about accelerating inflation, right? And I don't think there's any doubt in that. I think there's also, the market is concerned about, the fact that growth might slow, and we might have in this stagflationary period could come. But at the same time, you look at Kevin Warsh coming in office, right? And he should take office at the Fed, call it like mid-May, right? And so I think like May 15th. And, the question that the market's been trying to figure out about Warsh has been, is he, he's been, he's been a hawk at times, right? In his public statements, but there's also a perspective that, maybe he's somebody who's like very close to the administration, and clearly, President Trump wants him to cut rates. And if that's the case, how does he, think about his, personal views and how he might think about monetary policy relative to, what should the administration would want him to do, and how does he react to like political pressure? And I think people are very confused by that. And I think the market initially reacted in a way that said, hey, we think, we're thinking about future monetary policy based on how, things that he has said in the past. And now it seems like people are coming around to this idea that maybe potentially he's just going to give in to more political pressure. We'll see. I think there's also the story we haven't talked about here, which is the IEPA ruling over at in the Supreme Court, which obviously deemed that the way that we had kind of put forth tariffs was illegal and was kind of an expansion of executive power. And then obviously President Trump came out right away and said, well, we're going to use this different legal justification to be able to put on tariffs for at least I think it's about 180 days that he's allowed to, up to 15%. First he said it was 10%, then they're saying they're going to go and be up to 15%. What happens after that, we don't know. And so it's very clear to me that right now that there's just more confusion in the market than ever, and you actually have different people who trade these different markets who are coming to different conclusions in a way that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I think so too. And I believe I actually briefly misspoke with the way I phrased the first question, because yields are actually going up right now, which is sort of what you would not expect. Like bonds, obviously they move inversely with bond prices, and you would think bonds would be going up along with the dollar, but they're going in opposite directions, which it really epitomizes that source of confusion that you were talking about with Kevin Warsh coming in, the expectation of lowering rates, especially with inflation that seems to sort of be, it's not quite 2%, but it's not increasing like some feared as a result of the tariffs. But with oil and everything else happening here, that could just permeate through the entire global economy and challenge any efforts at cutting rates. If and when Kevin Warsh is even confirmed as Fed chair, because who knows what's going to happen with Jeanine Pirro's investigation of Jerome Powell and everything like that. But yeah, it is really kind of it's a tough juxtaposition, and I want to kind of broaden the conversation a little bit to just kind of get a sense of what's going to happen over the near to midterm, because as you mentioned, and plenty of other commentators around the world have been discussing over the last 48 hours or so, the timeline on when this may or may not end is fluid, and it seems like President Trump is once again trying to thread the needle that he did in Venezuela when he was able to extract Nicolas Maduro. The vice president essentially agreed to play ball and follow U.S. guidance. Guidance, I guess, is interesting term for I think what the U.S. is dictating to her to do. But it's not quite. I'm not sure what is going to happen in Iran. I mean, I think you mentioned, they've talked about regime change or not regime change. Like, would they find someone within the IRGC or like clerical leadership that would be willing to work with the U.S. or because if it's going to be true regime change, that can be a lot bloodier, a lot messier. And I don't see that happening in 4 weeks, especially if the U.S. wants to rely solely on air power as a way to sort of eliminate casualties, which I find it very hard to accomplish your mission in a country of 93 million people. So that's kind of my long preamble to the question of, like, how are you positioning? How are some of the people you're talking about positioning in this environment, especially like looking at recent history, like the Liberation Day tariffs, or even the bombing of Iran last summer, or like where we have these like V-shaped recoveries that are pretty quickly, but maybe this is a different situation.
Yeah. So we're a little bit different than, probably some of your listeners, in the fact that like we take very long views on the market, right? And we invest with the idea that like we will be in positions for, at a minimum, like, call it a year, right? So, or years, right? And so, we try to be opportunistic sometimes on like the entry point, but mostly it's around, okay, well, what do we think are the global the global backdrop, the macroeconomic backdrop over some long period of time. And I think there's two kind of answers to your question. I think the first is, well, I actually think it's quite positive that crypto and Bitcoin held up quite well over the weekend, right? Even at a time when you knew that, equity futures were going to open down or trade down. And there's some conversation will say, okay, well, Bitcoin is a store of value. And so commodities are up, Bitcoin be up. But Bitcoin hasn't traded that way, obviously, for months right now. And so I think it's positive that maybe it did, have that correlation or traded that way. And I think it looks like, the type of trading you've seen, around these events recently and around the Citrini article when equity sold down, et cetera, implies to you that there aren't necessarily a lot of sellers left, right? Most of the people are holding now are have much more long-term perspectives, right? And so I think that's a good setup for, being in crypto over some period of time. Now, that doesn't mean anything for the long tail of alt tokens because there's other structural issues there around what happens with market structure and, whether or not these things should be worth what they're worth and, revenue and fundamental value and things like that. So I think there's that base. So that's really constructive. Now, I think in the short term though, to your point, right, there's so many things happening that are real risk, right? So the equity market kind of rallied after NVIDIA really beat earnings and they gave, good guidance in the future. And then it faded that rally super quickly, right? The equity market also, when the Citrini article came out, a bunch of stuff traded down right away. And Citrini, I really like the rating that they do, but this isn't a household name. This isn't somebody that everybody looks at and is okay, well, I definitely should be trading off of, what they think. And there was a lot in that article that was just science fiction, right? And I think
reminding me a lot of George Orwell's 1984 type panic.
Yeah, no, 100%, right? And so I think it's very obvious that there's a lot of fragility in the market too, right? And I do expect that, kind of the long-term setup for, crypto is still very good with potential for market structure with how many, kind of institutions are adopting. But it's very hard, I think, to bet on crypto if you think that the equity market might take a kind of a real bath here. I think there was a couple articles out over the weekend or some sell side reports, which were trying to figure out, okay, well, if there's some fundamental value loss around, a increase in inflation and a slowdown in growth because of the rise in oil prices. And depending on how long this goes on, maybe we're looking at something like a 10 to 15% correction in the S&P. And if that happens, it's hard to see Bitcoin holding up, right? Even, considering all the really good fundamental value that or fundamental backdrop that we're talking about. At a time when there's just all of these other things that are unclear when it comes to tariffs and when it comes to anything to do with AI risk and et cetera.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I saw an article in the FT over the weekend that I think there was no better representation of traders not knowing what to do than seeing the whole market trade down 3% on a blog report or a blog that was published. So I think that kind of epitomizes things pretty well. So let's talk.
I think it's important to note, just to and because I want to really make this point, which is that the long-term outlook for the broader crypto ecosystem right now is probably as good as it's ever been, right? And we continue to have this dislocation around, okay, well, what's happening in Wall Street in terms of adoption of tokenized assets? What's happening with stablecoin demand? What does that mean for, real economic activity on chain? If we get a market structure bill passed, now we can talk a little bit about that, but I think that's a little bit up in the air. But all of these things are really good over the long run if you have that type of time horizon.
Yeah, and we'll get to all that because those are all really kind of good points. And I know most of my listeners are not day traders; they're more long-term investors, much like you guys are. But I mean, I was actually looking around Deribit this morning at some of the options positioning here, and I think it speaks to a lot of what you just discussed. I mean, by far the biggest open interest is I think a put at 60,000, especially settling over the next couple of days. But then once we kind of span out even to the end of the month, I mean, then we're talking about calls at 90, 100. I mean, it completely switches. There's very, very, very bearish sentiment, or at least people are trying to protect their downside over the next couple of days. But then things certainly are changing, and that might also speak to what I was talking about earlier. How usually these big acute conflagrations resolve themselves pretty quickly, be it the tariffs or the strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities last year. That's one thing I think Trump has actually done, that the market's mispricing the risk of some of these issues that everyone thought were big red lines that maybe they weren't. And I guess it just depends on how much of a red line this one was.
Well, I think it's like, I'm not an expert in the military or in war or anything of that, and I won't pretend to be, but it does seem like pricing this like it's June again is probably pretty wrong, considering the fact that that was like very targeted military strikes. Now, obviously, this time we've eliminated a large part of the leadership. There's been a lot of, I think you can already kind of see the news shifting towards negative sentiment this morning, right?
Yeah.
There's been, I think, at first, there was a idea that this would end really quickly. Then President Trump came out and said, okay, well, now it's 4 weeks, which probably means longer. And then you haven't actually seen the U.S. be able to enter Iranian airspace yet, which I think has been very surprising for people, because they're, to go and eliminate a lot of these like missile silos. And again, like this is what I'm reading from experts and some things that I'm getting, but I'm not an expert myself. But a lot of these missile silos, you need actually like short range missiles to be able to go find them. So you need to be able to get the fighter jets and the bombers into Iranian airspace. And that hasn't happened yet, which means that we haven't taken down their defense systems, right, to allow for that, right? And you actually saw today, I guess, like a couple F-15s got shot down in Kuwait. With
accidentally, it seems like, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's and it seems like, reading between the lines, that there might be some surprise at how expansive the Iranian kind of reaction has been, right? And in the entire region, and clearly trying to put some pressure on the the economic footprint of the allies in the region, and what that means for us. And so that type of reaction, and the longer this goes on before we can really start to get really take control of the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian airspace, does I think project out that this could be a kind of a quite long conflict.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, President Trump came out again yesterday, I think it was, and said that we wanted to do regime change, but that the people that we thought would be good leaders, we killed. So it wasn't unclear if that was accidental or not accidental. So it's very odd, the messaging right now, and it seems like there's like leaks coming out of the CIA that potentially, we weren't prepared for the aerial onslaught. We're worried about running out of these interceptor missiles in the region, and so the just reading the tea leaves, it seems like there's a shift and how we're thinking about the length and how expansive this war will be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if we've ever spoken about this. I actually worked for the U.S. military for 5 years as a.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
But I didn't do like combined weapons, like combat or that type of analysis. So I'm not an expert in like taking down air defenses and that type of stuff either. But one thing I do know from like helping our warfighters in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places is once the bullets start firing, anything goes. And when a regime like Iran feels that they're seems quite accurately under facing existential threat, they're going to empty the chamber one way or another. And it's hard to. I mean, even when you have the best laid plans and very clear objectives, it's hard, obviously, very hard to achieve them. Let alone sometimes when there's this type of confusion. But let's kind of turn things back to the markets. A couple of things I want to discuss before we get into a few other issues that are a few other topics not related to Iran. For one. It seemed, I mean, I don't know if basically the data I laid out from Deribit, et cetera, suggests that we're mispricing the market. I mean, you also mentioned too, how if the rest of the market tanks, even if Bitcoin is structurally better set up than other assets, it's still going to go down as well. But I mean, I guess maybe, do you think that the market is mispricing some of the risk when it comes to Iran because of how messy it could become? And then again, in a very not financial advice way, traders, people listening here might wonder how they can better protect their downside. What do you think are like one or two ways that they could do it if they so chose?
Yeah, I think market's probably pretty correctly pricing in risk, to be honest. The equity market's only being down a little over a point, I think makes sense, right? Bitcoin is actually up 2% over the weekend, right? And so it's been kind of sideways. Obviously this, I'm not an expert and a lot of what's happening on the option side right now, but it seems very clear that people are trying to protect, near term downside or long term structurally, bullish. That all makes sense to me, right? Because with this is happening in real time. I think when you put that in kind of context of everything else that is happening on the rate side, on the the AI concern side. I mean, obviously, we talked about the Citrini article, but one of the things that happened, maybe it was Friday, is that Block came out and said they were going to cut 40% of their workforce. Right, that is the largest correction or largest layoff, and I think S&P history for a company of that size, of a public company, right? And like that, it's not clear for sure that will happen, across all of these other companies, but it is, sort of a canary in the coal mine of maybe there will be actually a lot of layoffs, right? And what does that mean for the economy and the market if it does, right? And that's a longer term risk, but it's, that sign, people are trying to now price that in, right? And so I think there's just so many things happening and so many variables that's impossible to, really isolate, Iran risk versus, risk of everything else, right? And so it seems pretty correct to me at the moment. And I think like cautious with the rate, in the near term, with the right outlook over the long term makes sense. I think there's also, we've been on the crypto side, we've been trying to price in the likelihood of a market structure bill. And if you look at Polymarket today, I think it's, 52% ish, right? The people I talk to on the Hill, if they're not in crypto, but they, happen to be close to it, are more bearish than that, call it like, 35, 40%. If you talk to, a lot of the lobbyists in crypto, they're more bullish than that. But of course, like, that makes sense, right? And so there's just so many variables happening right now that I think it's really hard to make sense of the market, and it's moving so quickly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Couple more market questions, and then we're going to get to clarity and a few other topics. For one, I feel like Bitcoin, for the most part, most of the time has been unfairly punished when bad things happen over the weekends because it's typically the only asset that is trading. But we are now moving into a world where there's tokenized stocks, other tokenized assets that do trade 24/7, gold, etc. I know, especially for stocks, it's very, very early days for them. But I'm curious if you saw anything interesting over the weekend with how any of those assets are traded, or if not, like maybe just prognosticate a little bit on how, like, once those markets become bigger and more liquid, that could sort of like impact the way that assets trade over the weekend when incidents like this occur.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very interesting topic too, because if you look at what happened on Hyperliquid over the weekend, right, there's a significant amount of trading volume. What's that?
Oh, it's Rocket. I mean, I think Hype is up.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to ask you about Hype. I think it's up like 12% since the attacks began. So maybe
yeah, it traded channels about this morning, but it was up like it was up 10-12% over the weekend.
Yeah, it might be the safe haven asset in crypto these days.
Yeah, well, and because it's clear, and what has happened, right, is these HIP-3 markets, which is Trade XYZ, which is where they're doing a lot of the tokenized commodity perps and the tokenized stock perps and etc. We've seen significant uptick in volume on the commodity side and on the some of the rates and side as well. The stock volume hasn't been quite as high. It's been much more around commodities. I think at one point silver did itself, like in a 24-hour period, like a third of all Hyperliquid volume, right? And so oil this weekend was like absolutely one of the most highly traded asset. But these markets still do have like some structural issues in terms of allowing people to take risk over the weekend, because how are the market makers going to hedge out that risk? Like, how there's still you have these kind of buffers put in on Trade XYZ where they don't want to allow these things to trade more than 10% over the weekend, one way or another, because of the fact that if especially if it's equities, if you like limit open and things move really quickly, you could have like mass liquidations, right? Even just on the like that vol there. And so there's a lot of structural issues on it as well. But the derivatives and the perp side, or the perp side for the commodities, have been much easier for people to market make because of the fact that these are markets that you can more easily, rule with the sun, and that they are open for much longer periods of time than equities. Equities is a harder problem to solve. And so I think we're going to continue to see that grow. Hyperliquid's doing awesome. But I think there's the long-term outlook continues to be better for assets that are more highly correlated across global markets versus our, call it individual assets in the U.S. market or, call it a European market, et cetera. I also tend to be, I think, relatively bearish on the current state of spot equity on markets, right? And on chain right now. The way spot works today for most of the products. So, like Kraken bought a thing called StockX
or something.
or XStarts, yeah, sorry. And there was, there's Ondo and there's a few others. And there's the way they work right now mostly is that it's some sort of, SPV that, somebody a market maker has to go and put in an order to that SPV, and then that SPV goes through a US broker dealer, and that US broker dealer then buys the thing. And during off periods, you can't necessarily redeem. And so there's these dislocations that happen, and it's very clunky, and it's really hard to scale that product. And so I'm much more bullish on the derivative side. And I think we've seen that happen today. I think there's a future where, call it natively issued stock on chain, where it's its own primary market. That I think has a much better chance of growing than the current state of what has happened on these kind of SPV wrappers that exist on chain.
Okay. No, good explanation. It sounds like we could probably have a series of podcasts on that topic then.
Yeah.
So one more question, and then we'll move on to a few other topics. But I'm just curious, is there one or two charts, markets that you're really going to be paying attention to over the next, couple of days to get a sense of what's happening? It could be crypto, commodities, equities, anything.
Yeah, so I'm not a huge chart guy, and so I because of the way we invest. But listen, I think what's happening, to your point around
even just like an indicator, or like a piece of news that you're.
Yeah, well, so I think the most important thing for the markets right now is what is the likelihood of this thing lasting a long period of time, or of it be de-escalated pretty quickly. And so you saw President Trump come out, I think it was yesterday morning, and say that the Iranian new regime wants to talk, and potentially there's possibility for some sort of de-escalation. That was refuted right away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to see if there's any change in that conversation or what comes out in the media around that. I think you'll see the yield curve react pretty quickly. That'll probably be one of the first things that will react pretty quickly to that, and then oil prices, right? And so I think those tell you a lot about what the likelihood is of the of a sustained conflict that affects a bunch of other parts of the economy, right? So if oil starts rocketing up to people start to think that there's going to be huge supply chain issues, and oil starts getting close to $100, which people are talking about, right? That implies to you that there's going to be massive amounts of issues and and broader economic situation, which should theoretically also be bad for call it any risk asset, including crypto. And so that's what I'm most focused on right now is how does the conversation evolve on de-escalation? And if you start to hear President Trump and the Israeli media talk about sustained conflict, further call it U.S. member deaths. Unfortunately, we had a few over the weekend. Things around continue to increase the amount of bombing, et cetera. I think that is all an indication that we expect this to be a sustained conflict that'll have broader macroeconomic effects and will have broader effects on the crypto market itself.
Great. All right. So we're going to switch gears here, but before we do so, we're going to take another quick break to hear from some of our show's sponsors.
Quick note before we continue with today's episode. Bits and Bips now has its own dedicated home. We're spinning off from Unchained and launching a standalone podcast and YouTube channel focused on the Fed, macro, AI, and how it all collides with crypto. If you want to keep up with our weekly live streams and macro meets crypto breakdowns, make sure you're following Bits and Bips directly. We won't start publishing until March, but getting set up now means you'll be ready on day one. You can find the new Bits and Bips channels at unchainedcrypto.com/bitsandbips. You can also find us by searching Bits and Bips on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
All right, so I said we were actually going to move off of Iran, but one quick tangent before we do so. I wanted to just briefly talk about Dubai. It's one part of the world that has really sort of tried to promote itself as a crypto hub. It hosts a major crypto conference that I believe is coming up soon.
End of April, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, on top of that, I mean, it has a crypto forward regulator. It put out one of the first regulatory regimes on crypto, and has really become a base for a lot of big crypto companies and players. Just the way the war is right now, I mean, there was even it may have been, I don't know if it was inadvertent or not where it landed, but a major hotel was hit over the weekend, and if like Dubai, the UAE is a part of the world that is not immune to retaliation from Iran. I'm just curious, like, what you think that might mean for its future as a crypto hub, at least in the short term, and yeah, I mean, what the impact on crypto could be. I know there's also a lot of investors in Dubai that companies are trying to court.
Yeah, I do also think this is sort of a wait and see conversation, right? Which is, it seems like the what hit the Fairmont on the Palm was like debris. So there was a like a missile that was launched that shot down. Some debris ended up hitting the Fairmont. Terrible, right? And I think, like, you know, it's quite sad that happened. I also expect that we will learn a little bit more about, like, what the actual or the reason that the Iranians have been they seem to have been shooting purposely at some other hotels. Now, what came out of, like, Iranian state media over the weekend was that the U.S. government had moved, like, assets and people into hotels and out from some of the bases, and so these were, you know, military operations. That's Iranian state media, which is always going to drop.
I feel like I mean, I'm not an expert on international law, but if that's true, I feel like that's a war crime if you hide things in civilian areas. So
yeah, but then I think there was something that came out of the State Department today that said there were some people in, like, Bahrain in a hotel, but it's unclear how that happened. And so it's like, it's all very,
yeah.
The problem right now is, and this is a tangent, X is a great place to get information, you know, and then the general media is, and it moves much quicker than, you know, call it listening to New York Times or WashPo or, like, whoever the person is that you think about. But there's also so much propaganda and so much fake stuff that's, like, very, very hard to know exactly what's real and what's not. And so the best thing you can do is ingest as much information as possible and then try to figure out what's real.
Yeah.
Or we'll see. You know, there's a lot of smoke that needs to clear. I think on Dubai specifically, though, listen, it's been a place where we've seen a lot of focus on tokenization. We've seen a lot of focus on you know, building the startup ecosystem there. Abu Dhabi as well, right? Like, the Emirates has been, you know, very forward thinking. We're seeing a lot of new people move to, you know, ADGM regulated entities as well. And you know, I think if it ends here, that probably doesn't stop some of this, you know, momentum. But if this goes on for a while and we continue to see destruction and you know, the surrounding regions, yeah, it absolutely is going to be tough, because you're not going to have the expat community be as robust. People are just not going to necessarily want to move there. And so it's wait and see. Now, on, like, Token 2049 in Dubai, you know, I actually had a lot of our portfolio companies who were reaching out, and I'm supposed to go and speak there in you know, 8 weeks or so. And that our you know, kind of, you know, party line has been, let's wait and see what happens. Yeah. But it's certainly, if this is still going on 4 weeks from now, the likelihood that that conflict is going, or that the conference is going to happen in Dubai is very, very small.
Yeah.
It's going to be a huge hit to you know, to the kind of the ecosystem there, at least in the near term.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's switch gears finally. And I want to talk about clarity. There was supposed to be, I think the White House put a deadline, unofficial deadline of, I believe, last weekend to come up with some sort of compromise between the banks and crypto, in particular to yield on stable coins. Clearly that has passed. I don't necessarily think it was just because of what happened with Iran. It seems like this is a bit of an intractable conflict, but you're tracking it closer than I am. So what are you hearing?
Yeah, so I talked about it a little bit before, and I was wrong earlier. We did trade back up over the weekend from low 50s to it's poly market is now at 70%. That clarity gets passed. So I hadn't checked it in 2 days. It really depends on who you ask right now. So there, kind of for context, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this, but there was this Clarity Act was passed by the House last summer. The Senate had to mark it up. There was a Senate Banking Committee markup that came out. I guess it was about a month or so ago. That had this, call it new language around yield, right? There's a few other things in it that the industry is very against around some of the conversation around tokenized assets and how exactly we think about them. Also things like developer protections and making sure that developers can't be treated as criminals if their software is used for nefarious activities. And so there's a few things that people are really focused on, but that yield language was kind of this new thing that got certain people, and especially Coinbase, kind of really up in arms, right? That, then Brian Armstrong tweeted about the that markup and not being very happy with it, not being able to support it, and that threw the negotiations into a little bit of what I would say kind of overdrive, because what everyone thought they were kind of like locked in arm, moving hand in hand. That started to I think create some division within Congress. You then got an ag committee markup that was much cleaner and much more like clarity. It looked a lot more like what the industry had hoped to see, but you have to reconcile those two and you have to get it to the floor.
Forgive me, I'm sorry, I might be wrong. Wasn't one of the markups canceled, or did they both end up happening?
So what happened is the ag committee markup was supposed to come out on a Thursday, like a couple of days after the banking committee. When Brian Armstrong came and tweeted and said he couldn't support the banking committee markup, they pushed it, and then it pushed about 2 weeks, but then it did eventually come in.
Okay.
So yeah, it just got pushed a couple of weeks.
Got it. Thank you.
And so that markup's out now as well. But the banking committee, and because the banking lobby is so interested in it, they're the ones that are driving a lot of this conversation around yield. So now there's been a couple of roundtable sessions at the White House on trying to reconcile this language with the industry and with really the banking lobby. It's the banks that are doing this. And over the weekend, there was some news or some conjecture came out that essentially said that Coinbase, the industry, and the White House representatives and the government representatives think that we're at a good, kind of middle ground. We're at a really good resolution point, but the banks are still being, kind of hardlined, right? And so we need to get the banking lobby and the banks themselves to say, okay, this resolution works for us. And the main thing in my mind, and this is a little bit different depending on who you ask, is it's certainly important that we be able to still be able to do revenue share and allow people to fund things like reward programs and loyalty programs through revenue from the stablecoins, right? Mm-hmm. That is really, really, really important. The question that the banking lobby has is they don't want there to be the issuers to be able to send yield directly programmatically to call it end consumers. But where we fall in the middle of those two kind of extremes right now is what we are negotiating. And the banking lobby has said, okay, well, listen, we actually don't really care if clarity happens. And if we don't really care if clarity happens, we're going to take the most hardline stance, which is try to entrench ourselves on our regulatory moat and say that no revenue whatsoever from stablecoins should be allowed to ever pass on to a consumer. And that's also what the OCC initial rules said last week when the OCC put out their first guidance based on Genius Act. And so if there can be enough political pressure from the administration and, call it the, broader government apparatus to get the banks to get to somewhere in the middle ground here, I think the industry is there. And if that happens, the rest of everything that's still open, there's like 5 open items or so. All of that is solvable. This is the main issue.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder. I mean, the all everything you said just makes perfect sense, but I do wonder, like, what is that common ground that you could find a solution to, even if it's not making everyone happy, find something everyone can live with? Because I mean, banks pay virtually nothing to depositors. Yield that gets passed on to stablecoin holders is 3.5%. So I mean that would just eviscerate bank NIMs, and that's like economically unsustainable for them. So this, like, you could argue that this is sort of existential to the entire banking model. I mean, I'm curious, like, what the type of situation, what they could live with, regardless of how much pressure gets strong armed by Washington. And obviously, this is something that we all want. I mean, frankly, there's a good chance it is the and maybe the only, the biggest, maybe the only catalyst that will be bullish for crypto this year. But it's just hard to figure out, like everyone's trying to figure out like what that might look like. And I am. So if you have any other thoughts on that, I mean, please share it. But two, you said that the odds ticked up from 50 to 70% on Polymarket. I mean, I know sometimes markets can be manipulated, may not be the right word, but they can move based on certain traders putting on positions. I'm going to just ask you to speculate wildly here and wonder if you have any idea what was behind that. Is it a series of positions? Is it one major position that moved the market? I'd love to kind of, just given what happened, it would seem that the likelihood would go down, given that the deadline was missed and we're at war now, but it ticked up.
Yeah, I think on the Polymarket side, it looks like there was quite a lot of trading.
Okay.
Around 7:30 this morning that ticked it up from, call it low 60s to 70, and then over the weekend it did it from 50s to the 60s. Over the weekend, that was a little bit of what I talked about, which is I think David Sachs and a few others tweeted that, like, hey, we have an agreement, or we have a place that we think is acceptable for all parties. We just need the banking lobby to kind of walk through the door and to say, okay. Right?
That's it. We just need, though. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bits.
Good sign.
Is there anything else related to Clarity or DC that you wanted to mention before we move on?
No, I mean, I think that's where we are today. You asked me before, like, what am I hearing? That 70% for Clarity on Polymarket is much higher than I would say I'm hearing from people on the ground that are, maybe, less economically, directly aligned, that are saying, hey, like, realistically, I think it's, maybe a coin flip or maybe slightly less than that. And so that said, like, listen, I think we're all, in the industry, we all want to get a deal done, but it has to preserve certain things. It has to preserve developer protections. It has to get somewhere that makes sense for yield. It has to make sure that these tokenization wrappers do not, get treated so differently that they're, you can't actually use them as, like, performant collateral, things like that. And so if all of that gets solved, I think, there's the last open point is going to be that the Democrats want some sort of like ethics language in there as well. I am told that that'll get solved, and the White House understands that, and the administration sees a path forward there, and that won't kill the deal if we get the other stuff solved. And so that's a good sign. But I think it has to happen by Memorial Day. I think if you don't get a vote on the floor by Memorial Day, I think we're in a really tough spot.
I'd actually like to just, I don't know if press is the right word, but just maybe explore a little more the ethics thing, because that is a big, that is a very big issue that's central to Democrats. And I know Patrick Witt, I forget his exact title, but he's basically the White House's point man under David Sachs for all things crypto. Yeah. He gave a comment, I think, in CoinDesk that an ethics pledge was sort of off the table. But it sounds like there is a little bit of wiggle room. So can you expand on that at all?
Yeah, this is me reading between the lines. I don't know anything, personally. This is all told, but I'm being told by people on the ground. And so Patrick Witt is the I think the deputy chief of staff at the OPM, the Office of Personnel Management. But to your point, he's kind of the lead man on all of this conversation.
He's leading all the negotiations between
He's leading all the negotiations for the administration and the White House when it comes to trying to find a path to yield and Clarity Act. And the thing that we have on our side here is that getting this passed is a core part. It's very important to the administration. It's very important to the White House. And typically, when something is very important to the White House, something happens because like the Republican senators who want the support of the White House, they want to do what their leadership wants them to do, which the president is, right? Mm-hmm. That helps them in the future and in the party apparatus, et cetera. And so the fact that it's very important to the White House is a good sign, right? And what I have been told is that hey, listen, we're absolutely not going to do any ethics language whatsoever, is sort of a opening posture.
Gotcha.
But is not actually where they're at. There's some place to get something that Elizabeth Warren probably won't be happy with, but some Democrats will be happy enough with, right? And get and that the White House can live with as well.
Gotcha.
So, but we'll see. I mean, we haven't gotten even to that point yet. That is not going to even be talked about until we get the other stuff solved first.
Understood. Okay. All right, great. Well, yeah, thanks for that. Just last bit here. I'm curious. Congrats. I mean, your firm raised, I believe it's your fourth fund.
Fourth fund, yeah.
Yeah, and $560 million, which is pretty sizable.
650.
That's what 650. So even more sizable. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
As you very well know, I mean, back when I was at Forbes, especially in the earlier part of this decade, I mean, it seemed like every week we were getting an announcement about some VC fund raising billions or an accelerator fund from one of the foundations behind a blockchain, like 9-10 figure things. That hasn't happened quite so much, but and VC funding has sort of, I think, migrated from a lot of smaller projects that like doubling down on some of the bigger plays that have already proven successful. But I'd love for you to just spend a minute or two and sort of explain the rationale for, I mean, aside from just your VC fund, so you want to keep raising funds, like why now it was the right time, why 650 million, and like what are some of the areas that you're really targeting with this new fund?
Yeah, absolutely. On the why now, I think we've been pretty good at raising in times of where the market is at a place where you want to put money to work, right? And so I wouldn't say necessarily in bear markets, but the way VC should work, and it's very odd that it doesn't work this way, is that you should deploy a bunch of capital when markets are bad, and you should probably not deploy as much capital when markets are good because prices are higher, right? But what happens is
We'll call that the anti-Michael Saylor model.
Yeah, exactly. What happens is sort of the opposite a lot because there's more entrepreneurs enter the space. When prices are up, there's excitement. LPs want to put more capital to work when prices are up. There's just like more excitement, right? And so when there's fear, people don't necessarily want to give you money. So the key is to raise the money from the LPs when prices are up, and then deploy it when prices are down. And we try to do that. And so the way venture fundraisers work, and so everybody knows, is we announced last month, but it takes some period of time, and you have to have you have first close, and you do a couple closes after that. It took us about call it close to a year, which is very typical, right? And so in 21, to your point, in 22, people were closing funds in like 3, 4, 5 months. That never happened in the history of venture, and it has not happened since. And so we were able to raise during this time when there was a lot of excitement about what a new administration would bring, what Genius Act would do for the space. And then and things like Polymarket, which we're large investors in, got their investment from ICE. And now it strikes us that the time is now for us to go and actually give a lot of capital to startups who are, really excited about building during this period where there's not as much distraction and FOMO, et cetera. So we think it's a perfect time to go shopping and go invest right now. To your point around, and actually before I even pivot to that, I talked about this earlier, but there are so many structural tailwinds behind our space right now. When it comes to stablecoin adoption, when it comes to tokenization, when it comes to real world businesses building on top of blockchain rails, when it comes to The product market fit we're seeing with some of DeFi, with things like Hyperliquid and a lot of these vault products, it is, in my mind, one of the best times to be building in our space, especially around any sort of financial product. And then we're starting to see some, call it innovation or at least some experimentation around, crypto AI, and we'll see what happens there. Right. And so I think it's a perfect time to be building in our space, especially, and I think really the only other two spaces that are as exciting would be, call it AI, maybe AI robotics, and biotech. And I think that's it. I think that those are the only areas that like want to be on the edge of in frontier tech right now. So I think it's an awesome time to be putting money to work and to be building. And I think on top of that, you asked, well, why $650 million? Well, our last fund was also 650. We had done the same exact thing that we did last time, which is we went out with a $500 million target, and then we put on what we talk about with our LPs a hard cap, because the LPs don't want you to get it too big. And so we said, okay, we'll hard cap it at 650, $500 million target. We filled all the way to our hard cap. And why did we do that? We did that because the LPs were obviously very bullish on wanting to back us, and we were lucky enough to have really convicted investors. But also the reason we're not allowing ourselves to go bigger than that is our perspective is that this space is still not so big that you can, invest, call it $1 billion, $1.5 billion, $2 billion, and, protect returns. Right. And so I like to say this to a lot of people, which there comes a time in every asset manager's life where you become, or every venture capitalist's life, where you become either an asset manager and you solve for the 2% management fees, or you stay a venture capitalist and you focus on the 20% carried interest because you get really good returns, right? Yeah. So you've seen this play out in, call it traditional venture too, where Andreessen Horowitz goes and they raise $15 billion, right? Or some more than that. And, I think you look at the returns of their funds, and I can almost certainly tell you that across every vertical that they're in, they're not the best returning fund, right? But they have this big media organization. They do a lot of portfolio support. They have they have kind of all of these assets under management that do so many different things, right? And then you look at like a Benchmark, which has continued to raise, call it $400, $500 million for years, like 18 funds now. And you look at their returns, and their returns are consistently better than, the Andreessens of the world.
There's just not enough places to put all that money that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so we try to thread that needle of being big enough to we have great portfolio support team. We have a large talent team that does all of this hiring, where we've got teams in Washington that are working with our our portfolio companies and trying to help them navigate what's happening in DC. And so we try to be big enough to have enough management fees to support all of that, right, while also protecting the returns, and not necessarily. I mean, I think there's been a lot of conversation, or there's been some articles around other firms raising even more money again, right into the billions of dollars. And I think you probably do have to expand your aperture a little bit if you're going to put $1.5 to $2.5 billion to work today. And we still believe that there's enough opportunity in our space that we should be heavily focused on the thing that we know we do well, which is stablecoins, crypto, the kind of the intersection of the two, the financialization of new market rails, right? And kind of the digitization of those rails, coming into tokenized assets and being on blockchains. And so that's what we're really excited about.
Yeah. I guess raising aperture is sort of a euphemism for lowering standards. I guess
it's either that, or you look at, call it other verticals,
or just going completely different verticals that have nothing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think this is a good place to end it. Rob, is there anything that we didn't discuss that you wanted to share?
No, I think you heard it from me throughout the podcast in this interview, but I am very bullish on where we're going over time. But short term, there's a lot of things that we don't know, right? And so I continue to be, cautiously optimistic and very optimistic over the long term.
Gotcha. All right, great. Well, thanks so much for joining. Well, obviously, I have to have you back another time. Thank you to everybody for watching and listening.
Thanks, Steve.